Shalom. My name is Avi Meyer, and I'm AJC's Managing Director of Global Communications based here in Jerusalem. The West Bank is, in many respects, the Jewish heartland. Known in Hebrew as Yehuda v'Shomron, or Judea and Samaria, it is where Jewish kings reigned and where Jewish prophets preached, and it is today home to some 450,000 Israelis. It is also home to an estimated 2.7 million Palestinians, many of whom have lived there for generations and none of whom have ever had a sovereign state to call their own. The question of what to do with the West Bank has vexed Israeli decision makers since Israel came into possession of the territory during the 1967 Six-Day War. Now the Israeli government appears to be considering the unilateral extension of Israeli sovereignty to parts of the West Bank, a move fiercely opposed by Palestinians who claim the territory for a future Palestinian state. Where should Israel go from here? With us to debate this pressing question today are two distinguished guests and friends of AJC. Member of Knesset Merav Michaeli of Israel's Labor Party, who was previously a prominent journalist and commentator, and Ambassador Dore Gold, a veteran Israeli diplomat, including as permanent representative to the United Nations and current president of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Now here's how this is going to go. You'll each have the opportunity to give a 2-minute opening statement, followed by 2-minute rebuttals. I'll then ask you a series of questions which I expect will prompt lively discussion. Finally, you'll have the opportunity to make concluding remarks of 1 minute each. We anticipate a fascinating conversation in the long AJC Global Forum tradition of great debates. Let's get started. Member of Knesset Michaeli, your opening statement, please.
Thank you so very much, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure being here discussing this very pressing issue indeed. The State of Israel has existed, unfortunately, twice as long with the Palestinian-Israeli conflict at this form, twice as long as it has without it. So, to a large extent, it doesn't know itself without this conflict. But we need to go back to the forming of the State of Israel and ask ourselves, what is the Zionist dream? What is the Zionist vision? And I think it is very clear. It is a state for the Jewish people, a democratic state for all the Jewish people. Now, in order to have that, we need to have a border that separates us from the 2.7 million Palestinians who live in the West Bank. If possible, a border of peace, which I strongly believe is achievable despite the failures in the past. This is a border that will maintain Israel not only secure, but will ensure its identity as the democratic home of the Jewish state and will ensure its long-lasting existence for hopefully forever. Annexing unilaterally now parts of the West Bank, doesn't matter how big or small, will seriously jeopardize the future of Israel, the security of Israel, and unfortunately the mere existence of it. This is a very, very a grave mistake that we should not do under any circumstances, no matter how much political gain someone think he may gain from it. The danger is far bigger than it.
Thank you, Member of Knesset Michaeli. Ambassador Gold.
You know, I think it's impossible to have this discussion without having a sense of what's at stake. Why is the future of the West Bank such a critical issue for Israel? Why does it engender such strong feelings and debate? I think the first reason is you have to look at the geostrategic position of where the West Bank is located. This is not a typical conflict in the middle of Central Asia. If you have a chance to look at at a map which I furnished for this discussion, the West Bank is adjacent to the Israeli coastal plain, where 70% of our population is located and 80% of our industrial capacity is located. Therefore, should any hostile forces in the future take over the West Bank, which we also call Judea and Samaria, the results of that could be disastrous for our country, which is why we have to seek demilitarization of the area. We can't allow it to just continue onward with any kind of hostility that we might face. Now, we thought in the past that if we just withdrew from territory over which there is controversy, contested areas, that would reduce the hostile intent of our adversaries. And you know where we tried that out? We tried that out in the Gaza Strip. And that was in 2005 when Prime Minister Sharon put forward his plan for the unilateral Israeli pullout. And what we found was that actually the hostility in Gaza increased after we pulled out because we weren't careful about the conditions.
Ambassador Gold, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off here.
Just one sentence.
One more sentence.
One more sentence. One thing about the American peace plan, it's very careful about the conditions that will be put in place should Israel agree to the establishment of a Palestinian state. And those conditions are extremely important.
Thank you, Ambassador Gold. Member of Knesset Michaeli, your rebuttal.
It's absurd, actually, that Ambassador Gold should speak about security. Because let's remember that the state of Israel, when it was much younger, much smaller, much less developed, with a much smaller and less developed army, managed to live very securely in the narrow borders without the West Bank, and moreover, to win a glorious victory in the 67 war when we occupied the West Bank. Moreover, today, one of the main foundations of Israel's security and Israel's security policy today is the peace treaty that we have with the Kingdom of Jordan. This is the longest border that Israel has, and it is kept very, very secure, a lot thanks to the cooperation that the Jordanians are doing their part in keeping this border safe. And one needs to admit, the Palestinian Authority, despite every conflict that we have had with them and are having with them constantly, are maintaining the security cooperation. Now, a unilateral annexation will jeopardize all this stability that we have. It will jeopardize the Kingdom of Jordan. It will jeopardize, well, they actually already announced that they will freeze the peace treaty. It will create a lot of instability in the West Bank itself. It may cause escalation also from Lebanon. And it's not for nothing that the vast majority of people from the security system in Israel are strongly opposed to this move, strongly. People such as Amos Gilad, Amos Yadlin, the former Chief of Staff, Gadi Eisenkot, 300 former commanders for the security of Israel, all of them are strongly against it. So I really don't think that someone can argue in the name of security for this move.
Thank you, Member of Knesset Michaeli. Ambassador Gold, your rebuttal.
Well, the question is what we're arguing about. And frankly, I never said that I was going to argue for annexation. And there are two reasons why I have not argued for annexation. The first is that it's the wrong term. One of the things I did when I was ambassador to the United Nations is I would read the record of previous ambassadors when certain issues would come up. And it was fascinating to find that in 1967, right after the Six-Day War, the Pakistanis called our move in Jerusalem, when we added territory from the eastern parts of Jerusalem that were under Jordan previously, we added them to Israel. And Iban complained that Israel is being labeled as an annexationist, that it was annexing territory. It wasn't annexing territory for a very good reason. You annex territory that belongs to somebody else. But if the territory was assigned to be part of the Jewish national home, how do you call that annexation? It doesn't work. So he strongly objected, and he actually wrote a letter to the Secretary General of the United Nations back in 1967. In terms of what are we talking about and what is the debate over, Yitzhak Rabin felt very strongly that at the end of the day, Israel has to retain a united city of Jerusalem. And in his final speech to the Knesset on October 5th, 1995, he stated that. So if you're for dividing Jerusalem, then you got a problem with that and supporting Rabin's legacy. Finally, I would say that if you focus on the Jordan Valley, you would find that Rabin made a statement during that same speech where he says that he believed in Israel retaining the Jordan Valley in a final status settlement. And he said that it should retain it in the broadest sense of that term. In other words, not a little line next to the water, but the slopes of the western slopes of the West Bank Hill Ridge. What I'm trying to say is that depicting this as a debate or as a discussion between, those who want to concede territory and those who want, everything for Israel is not true. It's a much more complicated issue. And I would say the position that I support is that we should seek a territorial compromise that leaves vital areas under our control and is willing to share with territories with the Palestinian side.
Ambassador Gold just did, he showed two of the tactics that the right is using constantly. One, there are rules. I kept the rules. He didn't. So that's constantly how we're dealing in Israel. We're playing by the rules. They're breaking the rules. And so this is the game we're at constantly. And the second thing, I said nothing about dividing Jerusalem. And I am the number one, I will root to anyone who can achieve in an agreement as much land for Israel as possible. But I believe in reaching an agreement because every war and every battle must end in a political discussion and a political achievement. The only true security is peace. And no matter how much Ambassador Gold will convince us that this land used to be our ancestors and was given to us, it was also given to other people and they live there now. So unless there's some magic stick that Ambassador Gold has that will make 2.7 million Palestinians just disappear, then we need to find a solution for the security and the longevity of the state of Israel. What Ambassador Gold is offering, and unfortunately what Mr. Netanyahu is probably planning, does not contribute not to the security of Israel and not to securing its existence, but rather the exact opposite. And so speaking about what Yitzhak Rabin said really doesn't make any difference because he was assassinated for trying to work for these goals exactly. So now we are here without him, and we need to—
Member Michaeli, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off.
Peace and security.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's please try to do a little bit better in adhering to the set times, if we could. Member Michaeli, the next question is for you. The areas under consideration for this move include those that are widely envisioned as part of Israel in any final agreement. Now, you spoke about this a little bit just now, but can you explain your opposition to the extension of Israeli sovereignty to those areas at this stage, bearing in mind the current U.S. administration's position on the matter?
I have no objection at all in applying sovereignty over any territory, as I said, in an agreement. The most important thing is that we figure out a way to end this conflict. Maybe it will not be perfect. Maybe it will not be our, dream solution. But the most important thing is to understand that the so-called status quo, which is not at all statistic, but rather changing all the time and not to our benefit, is really, really hurting the state of Israel very, very deeply in every possible way. It is becoming really the core thing of our identity. It is hurting us in being able to do everything else, among other things, and maybe one of the most prominent thing is to deal with the problem called Iran. What we need to do now is focus on the one really big danger for Israel, security speaking, and that is Iran. When we are going for this irresponsible move now, we're distracting everybody's attention. We are hurting our ability to reach a new cooperation in order to prevent from Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. We are hurting the legitimation of Israel as part of the people, the family of the peoples. That is not about what territory will be Israel's in the future. It's about how we go about it. Problem is that today there is zero political will in my government to reach an agreement and a solution. That's what I'm so worried about.
Thank you, Member of Knesset Michaeli. Ambassador Gold, do you care to respond?
I'm just going to reiterate something that, I said in between different things that we were talking about. I strongly believe that we have to try and reach a negotiated peace settlement. I strongly believe that we have to reach an understanding with our Palestinian neighbors. Unfortunately, the last time there was an American peace proposal put forward by Secretary of State John Kerry and brought to the White House to President Obama, Mahmoud Abbas came to the meeting and was asked, will you support the American peace proposal? Prime Minister Netanyahu had said, yes, I'm willing to. I have a reservation here, reservation there, but let's go ahead. Abbas said at the time, I'll get back to you. One of the most famous diplomatic statements in 2014. So we waited, and he never got back to us. He never got back to President Obama or to Secretary Kerry. And that's unfortunate. I think we have to move the process forward. And I believe that the outline of peace that President Trump put forward in his plan provides an excellent basis for us to move forward. All the other peace plans that were put on the table talked about Israel accepting international forces in the Jordan Valley. That's not going to fly with the people of Israel. Of course, I know Merav Michaeli did not talk about internationalizing Jerusalem, but a lot of that has been put forward in the past. We need to work with a peace proposal that the people of Israel can live with. And that's why I think this proposal works and will lead us to the beginnings of a permanent peace. I vote for peace.
Thank you, Ambassador Gold. The next question is for you. If recent statements by many European and Arab leaders, as well as some key members of the Democratic Party in the United States, are any indication, this move appears likely to unleash significant opposition and possibly even punitive measures from some parts of the international community. How do you propose that Israel handle such international repercussions from this move?
Well, I'll admit to you, and I was Director General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we haven't always done the best job at explaining ourselves to the international community. But if we're going to go down this route, we're going to have to work double time with our diplomats, with our various people representing us, to explain the logic of what we're doing, to explain why past peace proposals all failed, and why this one has a chance. We really want to see peace happen and make it work. So give it a chance, and I think we can contain the reactions we might get from this move. Remember, we are thinking outside the box. We're doing something that hasn't been done before, and we're moving away from all of those assumptions that did not work.
Thank you, Ambassador Gold. Member Knesset Michaeli, do you care to respond?
Even your fellow organization, AIPAC, came out with a statement to congresspeople in America saying, go ahead and condemn and work against this intent of unilateral annexation in the West Bank. As Americans, we now have a president who is probably supportive of this move, but there may be another one in November, and the alienation that Prime Minister Netanyahu has caused with at least half of the American people, and certainly with half of American politicians, is very, very dangerous for the interests of Israel, because the alliance that we have with America is one of, again, are the strong foundations of our security. Now, Ambassador Gold mentioned before, again, the attempts that were made to make peace and it did not work out. Oh, we can agree about that. But I do not get the sort of indulging the blame game. Well, I don't care who's to blame. I care about my interest as an Israeli leader. And I care that the state of Israel remains safe, secure, and remains for as long as possible. And what Ambassador Gold is proposing is endangering the state of Israel. Speaking about other countries, first of all, we are getting very strong signs from the EU and from European countries. And I want to remind all of us that our friends in Eastern Europe have a very bad memory of unilateral annexations from their own experience. I do not propose to trust it completely. But even more so, had I thought that this is a good thing for Israel, I would have gone to fight for it all over the world, but it isn't.
Thank you very much. Member of Knesset Michaeli, this conflict has been ongoing in some form or another for many decades. How long should Israel wait for a credible Palestinian partner who's both willing and able to sign a peace accord and end the conflict and all claims, or do you believe such a partner already exists?
I am not an advocate of the Palestinians. As I said, I'm an Israeli leader. I work for the interest of my country, my people, my society. But as such, I think this is my responsibility and Israel's responsibility to work in order to find a way to figure this out. And as we know, where there's a will, there's a way. Unfortunately, and I'm saying this with every responsibility, since Yitzhak Rabin, we did not have in the Prime Minister's chair a political will to find a solution for this conflict. We need to make an effort. Israel, ever since Oslo, which I'm not sure, but anyways, certainly not during the Netanyahu era, Israel did not come up with an option, with an offer, did not initiate a negotiation. Yes, it agreed sometimes to the Kerry effort or someone else's, but it did not initiate and it did not try to work it out ourselves. I believe that Israel today is so strong and so capable. It's so much in our hands that there's no equality between us and the Palestinians in their very, very problematic situation in every possible way. And it's in our interest to work in order to find out how we work this out. Because, again, this is our interest. I don't want to get into the inner discussions of what are we going to give or not, because it's not about that. Anything that Israelis and Palestinians can agree on, for me, is a good solution. And I really know that if Israel put its mind to it, we can find the solution.
Ambassador Gold, do you agree?
I don't think people are aware of what Israel has done to try and make peace, but I really don't want to go into the blame game and to say, oh, yes, I was in this negotiation in 2015 or 2006 or 2007. Unfortunately, the Palestinians have let us down repeatedly. And it's not just the Palestinians. It's the leadership of the Palestinians. It's Mahmoud Abbas and it's Arafat before him. And I would like us to reach a final peace settlement. I would prefer it to be through negotiations. But if they don't negotiate, if they say to us, the leadership, Mahmoud Abbas, I'll get back to you, and they don't call us back, then what are we supposed to do?
Don't want to get into the blame game.
No, I'm saying, but that's what happened. That's documented. Buy Kerry's book. You can read about it there.
But that was 6 years ago.
And that was the last time we had a real negotiation.
Okay, so let's do something about it. Why don't we come up with some offer? And by the way, I am not against President Trump's peace plan. I'm saying, by all means, let that be a starter for negotiation. But my Prime Minister, unfortunately, my Prime Minister made it very, very clear that he's not going to the negotiations now. He's just going for the unilateral annexation.
People are stressing annexation. People are stressing unilateralism. This peace plan, which we've agreed to, says that the Israelis, at the end of the day, will get 30% of the West Bank. That's in the plan. And the Palestinians will get 70% of the West Bank. 70. So we're going along with a plan which is a tough deal for us, but we're willing to do it because we want peace. We also want it to be negotiated. We don't want to just receive maps and say, okay, this is it. So unfortunately, we don't have a Palestinian partner, but we're trying. And we're trying to make it work. And we're hoping the international community will show some understanding and support to make it work, because everything up until now has failed. And you've got to keep that in mind.
Thank you, Ambassador. The next question is for you. One of the most notable arguments against
you gotta explain.
For you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much.
One of the most notable arguments against this move is that it would undermine Israel's ability to remain both a Jewish and a democratic state. How do you respond to that? Can Israel, in fact, remain both Jewish and democratic if it extends its sovereignty to parts of the West Bank? What will be the legal status of those Palestinians who are integrated into Israel's borders?
Well, the people who are saying this haven't read the plan. And frankly, we're talking about, again, a territorial compromise where Israel is only taking 30% of the territory and 70% goes to the Palestinian side. So I can tell you that the plan, as I read it, does not involve Israel annexing, incorporating huge numbers of Palestinians that would alter the demographic balance. This plan is the closest thing I have seen to the original offer made by Yitzhak Rabin in his famous Knesset speech that I referred to previously. And, if that's the case, this plan leaves us as a Jewish state, as a democratic state, and as a state capable of defending itself and defending its citizens. And that's why I support the plan.
Thank you, Ambassador. Member of Knesset Michaeli, it looks like you might want to respond.
You read between my lines. First of all, Prime Minister Netanyahu said himself, he said it very clearly, that the Palestinians who will be included in the territory annexed to Israel will not have equal rights, will not have the right to vote, they will not be citizens. So no matter if it's a small number of Palestinians, what we're already seeing is a plan to make Israel not a democracy. If you have people who can vote and people who can't vote, it's not a democracy anymore. So, and that is Netanyahu saying, not my guessing or anything else, specifically to the move he's planning right now. But moreover, this, again, I hate being pushed to the corner of having to speak for the Palestinians. But portraying a situation in which, we're settling for 30% and they're getting 70%, wow. This is a non-viable plan for so many people to be able to live in. Israel is already much bigger than what it was supposed to be according to the program that the UN agreed on in 48, which is a good thing. I'm happy that we have more land, and I would have been happy to have all the land, but it's impossible. And I go back to asking, what is my interest as an Israeli? And my interest is that the Palestinian people live in a way that enables me to live in peace and in security and safety. Pushing them constantly again and again to a corner where they have to uprise again and again is bad for my interest, and they're not going anywhere. So we better figure out a way to make it work.
You mean the plan is too good for Israel, and therefore we shouldn't accept it because we put the Palestinians in a tough position?
You know, I said very clearly, anything Israelis and Palestinians can agree on, I will sign. And I said, moreover, I said the peace plan that President Trump put forward is, for me, a good basis for negotiation. But there has to be a negotiation, and there has to be an agreement. You can't do without it.
And what if they don't come to the table?
Okay, so let's talk about, because you spoke about Gaza as the example for why giving up territory doesn't work. We left Gaza unilaterally. If we had left Gaza in an agreement, it would have all of it would have gone completely in a different way. I, as someone who opposed the unilateral disengagement from Gaza in real time, not now in retrospect, can tell you that then I believe the same thing I'm telling you now. Had we gone for an agreement with the Palestinians as the first move on the way to a comprehensive agreement, everything would have been completely different now. But again, you cannot look away from the point of Israel being either a democracy where everyone votes, which my prime minister right now says is not the case, even in this limited annexation that he's planning or not. Because let's face it, nobody really knows what he's really planning. Is it the big plan, the small plan? Is it your plan for the Jordan Valley? Is it just something small and declarative? How many Palestinians are in it? Nobody knows. It's this secret between him and himself. Or maybe you do know, Dorian. In that case, please enlighten us, because the instability that's created by merely speaking so much about this annexation is already dangerous for Israel. So if you know something, please share. Maybe we can work better if we know what we're up against.
Member of Michaeli, actually, I'm sorry, Ambassador, you want to say something? Yes.
Yes. I consistently refuse to use the word annexation. This is not an annexation. This is something else. This is going to be a territorial compromise. And I would rather negotiate with the Palestinians on the territorial scope of this peace deal. But if they don't come to the table, if they consistently refuse to talk to us, I don't think the status quo is in our favor. I think we have to reach a peace deal. And I think President Trump's proposals have given us a bridge to peace. So let's take it and let's make it work.
Yes, but we're not taking a bridge to peace. What we're doing is saying, let's deepen our control over the territory and the Palestinians. That's what we're doing. We're changing the status quo for the worst. We're making it more dangerous, more complicated, and we're preventing from ourselves. We are making it more difficult for us to reach a future negotiated two-state solution. That's what we're going to do in this move, if, God forbid, we really do it. Hopefully,
and that's where we...
I'm sorry. I must intervene. I do have a question for you, Member of Knesset Michaeli. A majority of Israelis voted for parties that either explicitly or implicitly support the extension of Israeli sovereignty to parts of the West Bank. How do you reconcile your personal beliefs with the knowledge that a majority of parties in the Knesset, including your own party's coalition partners, support this move?
Well, first of all, here you really hit a nerve because I don't know if our viewers realize it, but I am one of three only. That is devastating. One of only three members of Knesset from Labor after this last elections, and I fought in our institution of the party against my two colleagues joining this government because I think that really, first of all, that's what we promised through 3 rounds of elections. We promised to be the alternative to the right-wing Netanyahu government and not to join it. And secondly, because I really believe that the party of Yitzhak Rabin cannot be a part of a government that jeopardizes so profoundly the peace treaty that he signed with Jordan and the achievements of Oslo, such as the existence of the Palestinian Authority, which even Prime Minister Netanyahu considers to be an asset. So yes, it's very difficult for me being the opposition inside the coalition, but it doesn't mean that I have to give up. Majority of Israelis still, a small majority, but even after 10 years, 11 years of Netanyahu in a row, and the right wing so strongly in power, still there's a small majority of Israelis that support the two-state solution. Now let's remember, most of these common people do not live on the maps like Dori and I do, and they don't really know what it means. They can't have the time and the mental and emotional vacancy to deal with this. They have COVID, they have real existential challenges to deal with. But the majority of them want the two-state solution because they realize how crucial it is for the future of Israel.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Gold.
Look, I think our differences are pretty clear, but I also feel that we have a great opportunity to advance a peace process in the period ahead, and not the bankrupt peace processes that we've seen over the last number of years. So it is my hope that we work to make the Trump proposals a realistic possibility. And I think we have to talk about reaching a territorial compromise with our neighbors, with our Palestinian neighbors, and stop using the word annexation, which is a term which doesn't apply to this situation.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm going to ask one last question that actually will be for both of you. And I actually suspect that your answers may be similar, so let's see if that's true. Bearing in mind the reality on the ground, including the presence of hundreds of thousands of Israelis over the 1967 Green Line and the bifurcation of the Palestinian population between the West Bank and Gaza, what does the end game look like for you? 1 state, 2 states, 3 states? What's the optimal solution to the conflict? And in your judgment, is there a realistic pathway to get there? Ambassador Gold, why don't you go first?
I'm glad you asked that question, because basically, if you go with the demographics, where we have people living, Palestinians living, Israelis living, within Israel, within the West Bank, within Gaza, it's a messy map. It is not a clean map. But you know something? We made a mistake with Gaza disengagement, and we put thousands of Israelis, close to 10,000 Israelis, in an impossible situation, forcing them out of their homes. Whatever we do, however we draw the maps, we should never again force Israelis out of their homes to make a peace plan work. And we should never force Palestinians out of their homes either. Now that means the map is going to reflect where people are living. And when you look at that map, you're going to say, how are you going to make this map work? We will make it work. And we will create a situation which creates the foundation of some kind of new, stable outcome. But it requires a lot of political bravery to do that, and we're going to have to absorb a lot of criticism.
Thank you, Ambassador. Member of Knesset Michaeli, your vision for a final peace agreement.
Well, unlike Ambassador Gold, I, from so many years of being involved in peace building and peace organizations, in civil society, and in politics, and in back channels, etc., I know that if we decide, if Israel decides that it wants to reach a solution, then we can reach at least the two-state solution, let's say, with a Palestinian state in the West Bank. Now, will the Palestinians be willing, able, among themselves, to agree on one state, or do they want to have two states, a Hamas state, a Fatah state? That's not my business. We will continue protecting the state of Israel as we have always. But I believe that we should really work for a just solution, and not only using more and more power, because that is something that never lasts, never ever. Now, you know, I want to already be over this, not because I'm tired of it, but as I said, because it really does crumble the state of Israel. It really does eat the foundations of what it means to be a Jewish state. Israel has become too much about the conflict and too little about itself. The question of how come Israel is the only state in the world that does not recognize equally all of the Jews, all kinds of Jews, is partly because that we are so deeply sunk in the conflict, rather than sorting out the question of the homeland for all of the Jewish people. So I think the most important thing is to really figure out a way to end the conflict, and not the way Dore Gold is portraying, because this is not going to bring the end of the conflict. This will just make it worse.
Thank you, Member of Knesset Michaeli. We've reached the time for closing statements. As a reminder, you will each have 1 minute. Ambassador Gold, why don't you go first?
We have lived for many years in a situation where we have been branded all kinds of names, all kinds of terms that are not true. And we have sought peace, and we have sought stability for our people. I will never forget after the '67 war, and I got to go back that far, when the Soviet Union decided they were going to brand us as the aggressors in that conflict. And they went to the Security Council to have us branded as an aggressor, and they lost. And they tried to go to the General Assembly of the United Nations and have us branded as an aggressor, and they lost again. And why is that relevant? Because we knew at the time of the morality of our position. And that's what we will know today. And that's what we will know in the future. We're willing to make a compromise, a territorial compromise, but we are not willing to put the people of Israel in danger. We insist on peace with security. And that is going to be the policy, the motto, and the mission of every Israeli diplomat in the years ahead.
Thank you, Ambassador. Member of Knesset Michaeli, your closing statement.
Yes, Ambassador Gold is insisting on narrative, on language, on consciousness, and of course it's all very important, but at the end of the day there's reality. A unilateral annexation, as small as it may be, or as big as it may be, endangers Israel from the Palestinian aspect, from the Jordanian aspect, from the Gulf countries that we've managed to cooperate with. It jeopardizes the bipartisan support Israel has in the US. It jeopardizes Israel from within its society. And the question is, what do we gain? And there is zero gain here. That is the biggest drama of all. And so, really, there's no reason in the world why we should pursue this other than political or personal interests that will lead to a very, very heavy toll that will be put on Israel, endangering its security and its future. This is something that we should never, ever do.
Member of Knesset Michaeli, Ambassador Gold, on behalf of AJC, thank you both for joining us on the virtual Global Forum stage today for such a timely debate. Shalom to our worldwide audience from Jerusalem.
Thank you for having us. Bye-bye.
You're watching JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, Post Office Box 360, Stamford, Connecticut 06904. Or you can call the JBS Pledge Line at 833-MY-JBS-TV. That's 833-695-2788. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. We thank you for your kind support.